We cannot ask the people who programmed us into oblivion to program us out of it. Education has but one honorable purpose, one alone. Everything else is nonsense. And that is to train the student to be a respectful and a responsible handler of power.
So the genesis of Mutapa actually is almost, say, 20, 30 years ago. While we are celebrating 5 years this year on the 25th of May of the formation of Mutapa, but the whole idea of creating an institution like Mutapa actually manifested when we were still in our teens. It started in high school. And the central problem we identified at the time was the fact that the manner in which Black history is taught is very problematic. And the manner in which Black people are reflected in what we are taught as official history, just in high school, is problematic. And so there was a small group we started in Shweme, which was called the Africa Youth Movement, a study group, a research group, if you like, which did alternative investigations into what we were being taught in the classroom, And so that cultivated the habit of venturing into what Africa is about, who are the heroes and sheroes in Africa. And we discovered a lot of what we were actually being taught in high school, in official history, is distorted. But it is also meant to portray Black people as unintelligent, lacking imagination, and generally just as people who have absolutely no meaningful contribution to human civilization, right? And that then sparked, the urge to investigate, to go to local libraries in Shweme, and in the process discovering books and authors, people like Sheikh Anta Diop, Marcus Garvey, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Kwame Nkrumah. I remember one of the most difficult books we read at the time, philosophical mathematics, if you like, consciencism, philosophy for decolonization by Kwame Nkrumah. But we just discovered this fascinating world, and one of the biggest revelations for us that was the discovery that so much has been hidden from us through the education system, and we were being deliberately fed a history that will reduce us to nothing else but servants of other races, right? And then that informed most of what we did, with people like Tsenolo, Matea Tau, people like Colin Muremedi, Musimani Khape, people like Vuyisile Mshudulu, and many of other brothers and sisters. So it created a consciousness, it created a movement, Of course, the base was also that many of us were members of the Black consciousness movement at the time. But the broader issue of the teaching and the research into African history, we saw it as a bigger project, And so that really laid the basis or planted the seed, right, for what later became Mutapa. And the actual institution then, Mutapa, gets formed in May 2020 in the height of the lockdown. And the observation we made was that for a long time, we had actually wanted Black people as a captive audience to infuse them, with the beauty of African history. And in a strange way, the lockdown was actually a blessing because it provided us with a ready-made audience. And we simply just decided to take advantage of the lull and the idleness of the lockdown and to curate an online platform, right? And we then had our first lecture on the 25th of May, 2020, and the first issue we dealt with was African Liberation Day, right, which is today erroneously referred to as Africa Day or Africa Month, and you hear people erroneously saying things like Happy Africa Day, right, and those are some of the things we sought to correct. And we've been on that journey ever since, So in a nutshell, really, if you were to say it, although it's not that simple, the heartbeat of what gave birth to the idea of Mutapa was really the teaching of authentic Black history. Yeah, it's another involved question, very, very deep and layered question, because so one of the things we have noticed as the Mutapa collective is that Mutapa has had a multiplicity of impacts on a number of people, because we have a general problem till this day as Black people globally of our very understanding of the self and the world, right? You can call it history if you like, or knowledge of self. So literally each and every Black person in the world is grappling with the question of who am I? What is my purpose? What value do I add to the world? Some Black people grapple with that question openly. Some grapple with that question quietly. But nevertheless, it's an existential problem that we are grappling with as Black people. So part of the impact that Mutapa has had is that many people have said to us that Mutapa has opened their eyes to first the identity of Blackness, but also to how the world works in reality and the place of Blackness in the world. And that has imbued a lot of them with the confidence to understand who they are, what their value is, and what they're worth. And these are people in their 20s and their 30s who had gone through life without a clear understanding of who they are. And they had been fed and they had imbibed identities that have been imposed on them. There's a multiplicity of identities that Black people are assuming, imposed consciously and unconsciously, part of the problem of colonization that continues. And that for me has been one of the biggest impacts. You know, we continue to get people who write to us as Mutapa and tell us how this has meant. But then there are also other two things that have been very heartwarming in terms of the feedback. A number of people also have said Mutapa has simply just instilled or revived the culture of reading in many of them. There are many Black people who are saying to us they never thought it was important for them to just either get a book or to just read authentic African literature. Mutapa has done that for them. Then there are others who also say to us, one of the benefits that Mutapa has had for them is that it has helped them in being able to give their own children an appreciation for African history, because we also have people who tune into the Sunday lecture series with their children. We did not know until people told us that we actually sit down with our families and our children, you know. And those are really the things that we have been able to get as part of the feedback from the people who follow our work as Mutapa. So the thinking, right, in Mutapa is that we view ourselves, you know, as an organization that, as part of Black people, is itself searching for the type of answers that Black people are grappling with every day. And for this reason, we value partnerships with other like-minded Black organizations, because we also then leverage off their strengths. So we don't regard ourselves as an organization that has all the answers. And our thinking in Mutapa is that we are students. So we always are prepared to learn, to be taught, and sit at the feet of other people who may be more knowledgeable than us. And it's something that we value. And this is what informs the organizations we collaborate with. And we have a number of organizations we work with. One is Ebukhosini Solutions. We've done a number of projects over the years with them, you know, and our relationship continues to grow with them. The other organization is Arise Black Child, which, as you know, was founded by our brother, the late Sandile Msibi, who was a core of our work, you know. And there are many other organizations as well. We also have a relationship with Nelson Mandela University, where we collaborate on joint seminars and symposia, if you like, right? And we also work with a number of Black consciousness and Pan-Africanist organizations across the country, you know, in the arts, the ones that are also in the political space, and we support their work, etc. You know, writers, poets, you know, individuals as well who work with us. And their contribution, like I said, has been complementing us in those areas where we may not be as strong and as experienced, you know, because our attitude is that there's no need for us to duplicate, right, certain things. So if we find an organization that is doing something that we believe is important and they are probably more experienced than us, we ordinarily support them because we're strong believers in that. And that has really been the value. But it is also informed by the fact that one of the important things to us as Mutapa is the whole concept of building Black unity. And you can't have Black unity if there is not an understanding amongst Black people about the importance of working with each other, you know, supporting each other. That's how you manifest unity, not just as a lofty concept that hangs out there, right? So the basics, you know, we should be able to work with each other. We should be able to support each other's work. We should be able to promote each other's work. And as Mutapa, I think we have done a fairly good job, you know, with the organizations that we work with. There are other organizations we don't work with, but whose work we also promote on our platforms, including individuals. And we hope that many Black organizations, you know, can have the same mindset, that we stop the mindset where we view each other as competition, right? Because this is part of the problem and part of the mindset that we must decolonize ourselves from, that there's greater value in collaborating, working together, sharing expertise and experiences. It's all credit to Mutapa again, right? Because everything that we do it under the auspices of Mutapa. And it is interesting, when at that way, that you should raise the issue of the mainstream media, because one of the reasons why Mutapa was formed was precisely because the extent to which the mainstream media is part of the problem of anti-Blackness in the world, right? The erasure of Black people, the juniorization of Black people, the whole trivialization of the existence of Black people. The mainstream media is an active participant and agent and beneficiary in that project, right? And our participation in the mainstream media also must also be understood in the sense that the type of content that we focus on is not the type of content that the mainstream media is interested in, right? And this is why they would from time to time call on us as Mutapa to come and give commentary. But we regard Mutapa and like-minded organizations as the actual platform, you know, that we must have for us as Black people. And we hope that we will have a situation, like I said in my previous response in our vision, where we are able to build independent Black media, you know, and Mutapa is part and parcel of that project, that Black people must see themselves as people who are capable of telling their own stories, you know. So our idea is that we are not going to perpetually complain about the way the media reflects on us. We are going to look at ways of telling our own story, unapologetically so. And Mutapa is that platform, you know, and where there's an opportunity to collaborate with Black-loving Black people in the media, we will not be averse to that type of collaboration. But the one thing that we will never do and subject ourselves to is to become part and parcel of the project that wants to reduce Black people to people who are mindless, people who have a predisposition to violence, to corruption, and to all manner of negativity. And that is the type of image that they want. We are not going to be part and parcel of people who just see Black people as these mediocre beings, right? Because we believe that it is important to reflect on Black people for what they really are. And we think, unfortunately, the mainstream media is part of that problem, you know, of making Blackness synonymous with mediocrity, you know. But of course, there are individuals, Black brothers and sisters in the mainstream media, whose thinking is very progressive and aligned to Mutapa, and we work with them, as and when there's an opportunity to work with them. But the important message is that Black people must tell their own stories from their own platforms, the way they want those stories to be told. So the work that Mutapa does, right? So we do lecture series, we produce articles, we do symposia, etc. Right? So all of that work at the back of our heads as the Mutapa Collective, all of that work is part and parcel of our own contribution to resolving the problem of Black captivity. Right, which means we see ourselves as part and parcel of the global Black liberation movement as Mutapa. So we don't just see our work as, intellectual or, discussions or exchange of information. We look at our work as resistance in Mutapa. It is resistance against the system of white supremacy and its various manifestations. And then that means that our long-term vision, right, and as Mutapa, is essentially to contribute towards seeing a situation where we as Black people are sovereign beings, where we are in charge of all facets of our lives, intellectually, mentally, spiritually, cognitively, economically, technologically, etc. Literally where you have Black people as sovereign beings, right? And not the condition that we have currently. And that is really what informs the work we do, and that is what defines our vision as Mutapa, right? And that is our vision because we also understand that, like one of our great scholars, W.E.B. Du Bois, said in his book, The Souls of Black Folk, when it was released in the early 20th century, that the problem of the 20th century, he said then, is the problem of the color line, which is the problem of race. We move from the same premise as Mutapa, that the problem of the 21st century is the problem of the color line, which is the problem of race. And this is why a lot of what we do moves from the perspective of race consciousness, which is the global Black condition. And that is what we want to contribute towards solving.
The genesis of Mutapa has a lot of meaning for me, particularly because I consider myself an individual who has been incredibly privileged and blessed. And I was blessed because I had, people growing up as a teenager, particularly at a point where I was beginning to grapple with the idea of who I am and what contribution I want to make to the world. I encountered individuals who were there to, guide me and anchor me on knowledge and information that I found to be incredibly important, particularly where I find myself now. But this is also information and knowledge that has been incredibly important to make sense of the world and where it is. And the genesis of Mutapa, in a sense, for me, stems to, that period in Khakosi Khaleshiwe 30 years ago, because I remember I was in my teens. And that moment is where we started really diving deep into understanding the position of the Black person in the world. And, fast forward to 2020, that conversation, begins again, in the normal empowering conversations that I normally have, no Sompisi, Veli, Mbele, Sompisi. And we were sitting and reflecting on, the meaning of this lockdown, trying to make sense of what does it mean for Africans, what is the intention of this thing in terms of, reordering the global world order, and where does the African find themselves in the whole reordering of the global world order, because there was an obscurity about the presence and the role of Africans in the way that, the COVID-19 induced lockdown and all related processes were being debated globally. And so, it then informed the discussion about, how many Black people find themselves asking themselves the same question about what position does the Black person or the African occupy globally? And why does the African continue to occupy that position? And this is where Mutapa was birthed. And we also then decided to find a name that will anchor the intention that we have, in entrenching an appreciation for Afrocentric history, and find a name that will anchor that intention. And that's how we settled on Mutapa, because Mutapa stems from the kingdom of Mweno Mutapa, which is the kingdom that was, the civilizational, pioneer in the southern part of the continent, because so much of the civilizational history that we are taught, only focuses on Kemet, or which is today known as Egypt. But we also knew that, through the learning and the knowledge that we have gathered over time, that there were various kingdoms in the African continent who made a contribution, significant contribution to the civilizational splendor, not just of the continent, but of the world. And we needed to really find a way of articulating that, but anchoring it in a name that would be relatable. And that's how Mutapa was then birthed. And I remember in the discussion, we said there's no better day to launch Mutapa than on the 25th of May, 2020. And that's when we unpacked, the meaning of Africa Liberation Day, and not what we were, informed to be Africa Day, And we unpacked the concept, and that really set, in fact, a whole train in motion that over time has become one of the authoritative voices of Afrocentric history. So that's in essence my role in the founding and the genesis of Mutapa as a movement. Well, to measure the impact of Mutapa, it takes two measures. The first measure is against the objective of Mutapa. And the objectives we've set was, one, we identified that there's going to be a large number, the majority of Black people, particularly in South Africa, are going to be trapped in front of an instrument or instruments, which is the television and the phone, that continue to tamper with their consciousness. That was the first objective, is to how do we find a way of, interfering with the process that tampers with the consciousness of Black people. The second is that we identified that, the formal education system that we are subjected to also tampers with the consciousness and the imagination of the Black child, and even the Black person in this world, And thirdly was also to find ways of, dealing with the Afrocentric or the Eurocentric nature of the history that we are taught, because we struck a correlation between the lack of appreciation for history and its Eurocentric orientation. And we thought that if we, begin to craft an Afrocentric, curriculum of our own history, it will build a bigger, appreciation, because more people would have resonance. And I think the impact on all of those measures has been really monumental, And the second has been that, the impact in terms of the number of Africans beyond South Africa that Mutapa has impacted, because we know that, because it's an online platform in the main, it has impacted people beyond the borders of South Africa, which was initially our target group. And we realized very quickly that, the Mutapa has got an audience in the continent, but also has got an audience in other parts of the world, particularly the United States, because we're drawing a lot of parallels between the position that the Black person occupies in South Africa and in the United States. And we even, drew parallels in some of our earlier discussions between the type of racism that you get in South Africa, in the US, and in Australia, So, and we called it the concentrate of racism, in its original raw form. And there's so many similarities in terms of how it was impacting Black people. And so many people could resonate, and that's why the audience grew. So the impact has been as such. But I think Mutapa has also impacted a lot of people, including us, because we continue to be students in this quest. We are not, we've never seen ourselves as teachers, but we saw ourselves as anthropologists that continue to excavate knowledge that would be beneficial, not just for us, but for Africans the world over. And the impact has been that there's a whole new world that has been opened to Africans about themselves. Knowledge that has been hidden, concealed, or even distorted for them, and hidden from them. And this includes a whole set of literature, that was sort of hidden in plain sight, from Africans, So, and we were able to bring to the fore, verifiable references about our contribution to civilization, our importance as a race, our contribution to, civilization, to even inventions, to pioneering discoveries as a race, not just in the ancient Kemet, but even in present in contemporary times. So this has been the impact. But also, we have, for many people who consider themselves scholars, Africans who consider themselves scholars, we also exposed a different way of referencing, authentic Afrocentric knowledge, because you're always forced to reference, Eurocentric scholars and philosophers and so on. And we're able to draw quite credible and authoritative voices that could be referenced in scholarly work, and that's really have been part of the impact. But the greatest has been that, and I remember one of the sessions that was most resonant was when we did a conversation with our daughters, to try and engage their affinity to Afrocentric history and how they see the world. And that, episode resonated with so many, particularly, young single parents, Black mothers in particular. And they were the biggest feedback that we got was from them. And this also sparked, I think, an interest in Black fathers and Black mothers to expose their children to the, Mutapa Afrocentric Dialogues that we normally publish. And this has been, for me, the most exciting impact, is that now our content is being followed by future generations. The highlights have been certainly that we have created a space that many Africans can resonate with, many Africans see as their own. I mean, we have featured, other important thinkers, African thinkers, to come in and share their ideas on our platform, so that we don't monopolize the space and create a sort of dietyship about Mutapa, or even us as the co-founders of Mutapa.
Sister Afyong.
Yes, we have had, Sister Afyong, we've had Brother Chekishandu, we have had, even people in the arts such as the late Mshudulu Shabangu, Ausnapo Mashiane. We featured a whole lot of people that made important contributions, to Mutapa. But even we have also not just kept Mutapa within Mutapa, we've also taken Mutapa to other spaces and worked with, Ebukosini Solutions. We've worked with Arise Black Child, and Ndlondlo, the success and the story of Mutapa can never be complete without the role and contribution of Sandile Msibi Ndlondlo, and may his soul rest in peace, because he brought such a refreshing contribution to Mutapa. He was very innovative as a thinker, and also appealed a whole lot more to younger people, because he was a young person himself, and these are the types of voices that we could allow to reverberate throughout the Mutapa trajectory. And for me, those are some of the greatest highlights, of Mutapa. But also importantly is that when there are, seismic shifts in the African continent, there have been very few voices that could be drawn on to come and clarify what those means for Africans. And Mutapa has increasingly been invited by, broadcasters in South Africa to come and, commentate on important geopolitical shifts that the African continent was making, both in the continent but also globally, and to try and unpack those from an Afrocentric perspective. This is unprecedented, if you look at the history of broadcasting, particularly mainstream broadcasting in South Africa, because they've always regurgitated the same voices and the same messaging, which is highly steeped in the imperial hegemonic agenda, that is the Western hegemonic agenda. And there's never been space, not even little space, to give expression to Afrocentric voices. And we see that there's a greater affinity to try and feature those. And Mutapa has had that impact, Mutapa has also shaped the news through some of the content that we've generated in the past, particularly in honoring and commemorating important, contributors to our history, who seem to be, relegated to the dustbin of history. But we have brought those names to the fore in a manner that dignifies them, in a manner that pays homage to them, and give them the respect that they deserve. And those things have shaped the news, and those are, for me, some of the highlights. So, the initial idea, we did discuss where do we want to take Mutapa. And one of the things that bothered us a lot was that we have, relegated the responsibility of educating our children as Africans to other races. And there was even a sense in which that it seems like it's something worth celebrating, that, my children are educated by a different race to who I am. And that we found that to be very problematic. And therefore, one of our long-term objectives has always been to collect all of the content we're generating and formalize it into a curriculum, and we can establish a formal Afrocentric school, so that we as Africans take over the responsibility of educating our children. And we understood the impact of that being that we are reclaiming the imagination of African children. And by reclaiming their imagination, it's very easy to then conscientize them, towards the African agenda. Because now, one of the things that we always talked about in the Mutapa sessions is that in your quest to liberate Africans, the biggest threat or opposition that you may face will be from Africans themselves, because they have become proxies of the Western agenda, and we see even now, some of the biggest threats that people like Ibrahim Traore face currently is not really necessarily from France or the US, but it is from within the African continent, Cote d'Ivoire. The statements that ECOWAS issued quite in the beginning when we started unpacking the Burkina Faso issue, where we're paying tribute to Thomas Sankara and we made reference to Ibrahim Traore and his contribution. Those statements that were issued by ECOWAS, those were threats coming from Africans towards another African. And this is to an African who's trying to liberate, Africa or Africans, So this is the thing that informs us and informs our conviction to create, a pioneering Afrocentric school that will become, a network of schools that will move across the continent and giving authentic Afrocentric history and education.
What motivated me to become part of Mutapa is the fact that I could not think of any other cognitive home, particularly as it relates to Black history. Ke mosetsana wa Motswana, ke Motshidisi, ngwana wa Mabele ga batho. I grew up in Tabanchu, and Tabanchu was part of what was then known as Bophutatswana, right? And ever since I could remember, we had this Rasta neighbor. His name was Lefty. I will never forget him. I don't think he understands the profound impact he has had on my life. I grew up to the sounds of Peter Tosh. That was my initiation into Black history. I knew nothing about Rastafari, apart from the fact that my great-grandmother was a Rastafarian. So then I would listen to Peter Tosh's music, and it didn't sound like any other sound, any Iloko Pop radio or any other radio station that we used to listen to. And I was so drawn to this man and his way of articulating the state of Blackness in the world during that dispensation, right? Fast forward to when I was 13, I moved to Pretoria. So there's a bit of a disconnect. I'm no longer as connected to Black history as I was until later. When I get to university, I must have been 18, around 19. And that's when my love for Black history was ignited again. Part of what I had to study had to do with Black poets like your Langston Hughes, Bomutaba Ruka. And I felt like, okay, so this is me picking up the baton again and starting to run. But I felt so displaced. I was like, okay, where am I, in this search? Because I'm in an institution that drives a certain idea, and I lean more towards a different kind of idea. And to your peers, you look like you're a bit mad. Why aren't you going with the flow? Especially, what is this Black power thing that you're about, And then I met like-minded youth, started going to certain spaces. And then I found Mutapa and I started stalking Mutapa on social media platforms. I was like, who are these people? And they are talking like this in this dispensation. This is so refreshing. There is nothing like this on radio. There is nothing like this on television. And I would attend the Zoom lectures diligently, and I would try to move quietly, and sometimes you think you're moving quietly, can't you know? Surveillance that can detect the slightest movement. And then the co-founders of Mutapa, Ntate Veli, Mbele, and Ntate Shweme, invited me to be part of Mutapa as a project coordinator. Now, I had, I don't know whether to call it internal conflict, because I felt, and I still feel like I'm an eternal student of life. And it's like this platform that I have looked up to for so long, thinks I am worthy of being a part of such a significant movement, you know, amongst Black people at this time. And I've seen the caliber of people, you know, that are on the platforms that speak on the Mutapa platform. It's a really big thing, you know, and I don't know if I can carry it. And I was like, you know what, just be humble, be meek, be you. And yeah, and Mutapa has been my cognitive home since then. Mutapa has inspired so many ideas about where I think Black people ought to be, or where I think Black people ought to go in the world, and how Black people can really start taking up root and being able to become the big trees that we ought to be, and no longer downtrodden or looked down upon by others. So that's what inspired me to be part of Mutapa, in a nutshell. You know, impact, I have learned, is not about being preachy. So how Mutapa has impacted me is in significant paradigm shifts that I was not even aware of. I am being told, hey man, you are a bit more radical these days, you know, how about Mchini? Anywhere you are in the boardroom, like busy, like to a point where my character is not in question. There is absolutely no question about what it is that I stand for. And Mutapa as a platform has given me the kind of wings that I feel a Black child, a Black woman, a Black mother needs in these times, because it's not an easy existence. You know, there is a lot that is heaped upon us as Black people, things that we did not necessarily ask for, but we are carrying nonetheless. So a platform such as Mutapa has given me a lot of grounding, you know, understanding of Black history. It's so important to see things through our own cognitive lens, because for the longest time, we have been told who we are, or who we ought to be, what we should dress like, what we should sound like. It means I am this caliber of a Black person, or there's a whole lot of things that we are taking in and assimilating into, because we do not understand where we come from. Holistically, we do not understand where we come from politically. We do not understand where we come from spiritually. We do not understand where we come from economically. So Mutapa for me is a merger of all of these areas of study as they relate to Blackness, you know. And I would say for me, I wouldn't necessarily say my confidence has shot through the roof, but I know that Mutapa as a vehicle is a solid vehicle that many generations can rely upon for Black authentic history. There is a need for Mutapa as an institution and a model to be replicated throughout the world. As a microcosm of what could be, we have seen its impact, even as a mustard seed, or as tiny as it started within Azania or within South Africa. You know, I have seen its impact on little children. You know, I have seen its impact on how it makes the understanding of history attainable. Suddenly, it's not about bombastic words or trying to sound clever, but using the past, showing how the present is directly linked to the past, and how you cannot move forward if you are unable to trace certain things, because you will risk repeating mistakes of the past. That can only come through education, right? Because that is where now we shape and mold minds. And I think Mutapa as an institution is the perfect model to replicate throughout the world, because we have children that in this day, and I'm very passionate about children not only knowing about their history, but also being who they ought to be, in the world. And for me, Mutapa is that kind of vehicle that can assist many Africans here on the continent and in the diaspora to hang on to that sense of self and to know that it doesn't matter what space you are navigating. Remain untouched, remain unchanged. Let your core remain the same, be centered in everything that you do, because that's how you will be able to draw power to move around in the world effortlessly. If you have a good sense of who you are, who your people are, where you come from, that's the only way you can have a clearer picture of where you're going. Initiatives such as Mutapa need to be supported by every single person. Remember, Black people do not only have to donate money to organizations such as Mutapa. There are so many Black people who are skilled. That skill translates into money if you think about it. If you give with your skills, whatever they are, you can contribute to an organization such as Mutapa or similar organization. You can give your time. We have so many, I love what has happened post-apartheid is this. Obviously we've always had Black intellectuals, but now we see more and more Black people entering institutions of higher learning, attaining certain skills that would have been considered rare back then, And my question is, fine, you are here where you are. What are you doing to contribute to your own people's future, to ensure that you build institutions that will continue to nourish, future generations, I don't know if we are doing enough. And that's the question that I always ask myself, am I doing enough? Being part of Mutapa is absolutely amazing, but is it enough? Am I within Mutapa as a vehicle? Am I as a person maximizing on this opportunity to create future institutions that will outlive me? Because I'm not only thinking about the now, So Mutapa as a vehicle for me needs to be supported, by Black people from, various sectors, various industries, but also Black people in the diaspora, because this knowledge is quite universal. It's not limited to the select few. It's knowledge that every Black child should be able to recite, without flinching. So financial resources are needed, skills are needed, and a whole lot more that we haven't even thought of, because we are continuously learning. Just as you think you've grasped one thing, something comes along that shows you how you can become a better version of what you currently are. So it's of the utmost importance to support Mutapa, but also for other organizations to not work in silos, but see the good that Mutapa is doing and lend a hand, so that we can cross-pollinate nicely and have a seamless flow of Black regenerative ideas for the future of our babies.
I believe as a young African, like growing up in Africa, we ask yourself a lot of questions about the state, why people are suffering. But because we have limited information, you tend to have limited answers. And in that regards, you appear to sound like you are crazy to a lot of people when we have conversations about these things. But that changed when I came across the platform called Mutapa. I regard it as a well that is endowed with a lot of knowledge, in particular about African history, Black African history to be precise.
I'm the brand manager of Mutapa. I've been a member for about 5 years. All right. What motivated me to be a part of Mutapa? One, it's a Black consciousness platform. It's a platform based on Black consciousness principles, and also my basic love of history. I love history and being kept up to date with current affairs and understanding the present with the historical context, and also through the lens of Black consciousness. And Mutapa did that very well. So I was enjoying that for a bulk of throughout the lockdown. The impact on that Mutapa has is I think now with living in a predominantly neo-colonial system where the mainstream is sort of pushing us to adapt or to conform to what's called mainstream. Mutapa has been that island, of solitude where we can stand firm and find like-minded warriors in there. Mutapa is important because one, we need to view the world through our own lens. More often than not, we are being told, how to feel about this, how to view such and such a thing, and Mutapa gives us the ability to, or not just the ability, but it keeps reminding us to look at the world viewed through our own lens. The norm is to look at the world through a white lens. Yeah, so I think that's the most important element. The support that Mutapa needs, the first is viewership. I think the viewership that we've been enjoying, the fellow minds that are joining, and just that space of having Black people sit together and talk about Black issues, that's one big support. Moving forward, I think strategic partnerships, whether it's with universities or whoever is running programs, those type of things, to be put on more platforms.
Yeah, good afternoon, Black family. My name is Pedro Mzileni. I'm tuning in from the University of Zululand in South Africa. And I just want to join Black people in Africa and around the world in wishing a happy 5th anniversary to Mutapa Afrocentric Dialogues. It has been a wonderful journey since these dialogues began during COVID. Actually, a very dark period for us Black people who were, mostly affected by the effects of the virus, and of course, the neo-colonial states who decided to attack our livelihoods, our businesses, and also our forms of labor and survival as Black people in Africa and across the world. We also saw in the diaspora how Black people's lives were badly affected by, centuries of being denied the means of life. So you saw the lack of access to public health care, the lack of access to social benefits from employers that Black people work for as cheap labor, who did not invest in their medical cover. So all these things were part of the neoliberal modernity that continues with its racist terror on the lives of Black people. So during that disillusionment with the crisis, Mutapa came in as a space for us to dialogue, to heal, to make sense of what is going on, to remind ourselves of who we are, what we are capable of, and to also draw strength from each other to have resilience, to continue with our lives despite the disruptions to our livelihoods and also the deaths that we're facing in our families and communities. So Mutapa has played a very big role in restoring our dignity, in restoring our sanity, and also conscientizing us to cultivate our minds that give us the knowledge to inspire action for us to fight for our self-reliance. Mutapa is followed by my students. We use it to learn, to entertain, and we enjoy every lecture that is provided by Veli Mbele and all his associates on the platform. May the platform live long and continue for many years to come, and we look forward to the wonderful celebrations that we're going to have. Thank you very much, Black Family. Tamako.
Dumelang ke nna Puleng Nchabeleng. I am from Pretoria, Soshanguve, and I am a Mutapa supporter. I came across Mutapa Afrocentric Dialogues in 2023 when I was doing an anthropology module in Pamatata Haholo, and then Mutapa videos came in very handy for me with regards to that module. So by the time I was done with that module, I was now very curious and hooked to the dialogues. So I've been a Mutapa supporter ever since then. Mutapa is very important to me because it teaches me an authentic African Black history. The history that is made accessible to us, and the history that we are being fed through media and everything, it's very much filtered, very much sugar-coated and manipulated. So an association like Mutapa is very important because it gives us the original information that we need to pass on to our children. So thank you, Mutapa, for teaching us this authentic Black history. Continue doing the great job that you are doing. Happy anniversary. Kamako.
Mutapa. Mama Matikizela Mandela.
You Black
T Mama Thandiswa Mazwai.
Ayabonga Kaka. Wena Wengonyama. P Dr. Pedro Zile.
Vunga Mangonyam. Sister Amanda Blake.
Mutapa for Black power. Mutapa for Black consciousness. Mutapa for Afrocentric dialogues. Mutapa for Africa. Mutapa for Azania. Long live the spirit of Mutapa, long live. Long live the spirit of Azania, long live. Amandla, Phambili Mutapa, Phambili.